Hello, good evening. I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Sharaad Kuttan.
Welcome to Consider This, the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider the news of the day. Let's begin with the US Justice Department's settlement deal with Jho Low to recover almost $1 billion in funds linked to 1MDB. $1 billion, that's almost 4.2 billion ringgit. And now Dr. Mahathir, Prime Minister, says that Malaysia will be asking the US to hand over that $1 billion. Here's his clip.
The asset was bought with Malaysian money. We have proof that it is Malaysian money. We will now make a claim to the American government.
So that was the Prime Minister saying that we're going to be asking for the money back. Let's break it down, Sharaad, and take a look at this historic agreement and see what this means for all the parties involved.
Right, it's historic for a couple of reasons, Melissa. Of course, one is that it's just the sheer scale of the asset and values that are involved, and that is one reason. The other is just because of the complexity of the case, right? And the fact that the DOJ and Jho Low have come to an agreement that means bypassing years in courts and lawyers' fees and battles that are uncertain in terms of its outcome. This is obviously a victory for the DOJ's kleptocracy asset recovery initiative. The question I think a lot of Malaysians are asking, is it a victory for Malaysia?
Right. Well, is it a victory for Malaysia? Well, it depends on how we execute this, right? Whether we get that money back that Dr. Mahathir was talking about. I mean, the funds could be repatriated to Malaysia, and according to some analysts, this could also then allow us the resources to continue that ongoing trial of Datuk Seri Najib Razak. Also, it gives us an opportunity to start a dialogue with Jho Low, which will undoubtedly aid the Najib prosecution process, right?
Right, also, but because you realize that these are assets, not necessarily cash, and so there'll be there presumably going to be a sale issue around this, and then the question of, the valuations of these assets versus what actually can be recovered. So if you think of equanimity, it was sold, but it wasn't sold for the price that it was valued at at that time. So there are complexities involved. Of course, there's also, there was mentioned by the Attorney General that Malaysia believes that the actual amount that Jho Low was alleged to have siphoned from the 1MDB fund, from government coffers, amounted to some $10 billion.
Well, that's almost double, right?
Yeah, so there's complexity in stories. I think also, Melissa, there is this issue, right? For years of vilifying Jho Low as a central character in the the mismanagement, as critics put it, of government finances by the Najib Razak administration. He was a central figure, much vilified. Now, Najib Razak's on trial.
Right.
But if Jho Low evades trial in Malaysia, the question is, will people feel satisfied? I mean, having been sort of demonized for all these years.
Well, I have to ask this question as well, right? So we talked about how this settlement deal is a win for the US and the DOJ there. We talked about how this could be a possible win for Malaysia, depending on how it's executed. Is this a win for Jho Low? Now, many countries will perhaps follow suit and see this as, the gateway to perhaps granting Jho Low asylum. We know that now he's in the UAE and also has obtained asylum in another country based on the basis of human rights and political persecution, according to reports.
That's a possibility, and that's Jho Low's case to the world. And he's quick to point out that this settlement does not include admission of guilt or wrongdoing. But the DOJ, and I think this is often missing in many of the reports, the DOJ, the Justice Department of the US, makes very clear that he does not release him from potential criminal charges. Right?
There are some pending charges.
There are pending charges and future charges as well. So Jho Low is not off the hook. He might think he's the great escape artist, but he just might see justice in Malaysia.
All right, so this is a developing story, one that we will be keeping a very close eye on. In other news, there's a Malaysian couple in Norway who are facing child abuse charges. So Hari Muhammad and Norhila Kamis, they've been living in Stord, Norway for the past 10 years with their 5 children aged between 4 and 16. However, they'd lost custody of their children since May, and this was following an investigation by the Norwegian Child Welfare Services based on complaints made by one of their children.
Yeah, this started during the Ramadan month last year when one of the children complained of feeling stressed because of the long fasting period, some 12 hours it's reported. The teacher, concerned that the child was being abused, reported the matter to authorities, and the children were taken away from the parents and put into protective custody. Now, the question is, Melisa, is this a question of miscommunication? Cultural differences have translated badly across, in terms of communication.
Right.
Child in some ways complying to religious necessities, but then that being read as abuse.
Well, okay, so when I read this story, I had a feeling of deja vu, because I think it was about 4 years ago, there was another case. A Malaysian couple found guilty of child abuse in Sweden and then sentenced to prison in that country. So the mother of the 4 children was handed a 14-month prison sentence for gross violation of the integrity of their children. The father was sentenced 10 months in prison, and both parents, so the couple, was also ordered to pay damages to their children.
Yeah, I wonder if they paid the damages. But more importantly, it seems to me, if I cast my mind back to that time, and if you do as well, what you'll remember is that the local media, especially the mainstream media, were very quick to defend the parents, asserting a Malaysian standard over the host country, Sweden, at that point in time. So, and saying that, somehow they were wronged. And I remember it wasn't a time where people thought deeply about our parenting norms.
Right.
It wasn't taken as an occasion for us to recalibrate those ideas.
Well, let's talk about those norms, because as recent as July, the pollster YouGov put out, the results of a survey finding that when it comes to corporal punishment for children, almost 50% of parents think it's okay. So, Malaysian parents are very split when it comes to the, the idea of how to, corporal punishment with their kids. So those are the parenting norms that you speak about. And you're absolutely right. It was a missed opportunity for us to take a closer look at how we, our traditional view of parenting. But I want to say, I want to put it out there, is this the same case? Because I think that the Swedish case was really about corporal punishment, and the Norwegian case was about religious training for their children, or allegedly.
Yeah, because, I think I'm sort of agnostic about it, because I'm waiting to hear more details about the case. But I think, Melisa, regardless of the facts of the case, the issue, again, goes back to parenting. Now, can parents, or should parents, have the right to force their children into forms of religious obligation? I know that in Malaysia and many Asian countries, this is seen as completely abnormal, that your children follow in your footsteps when it comes to religion, and you can, in fact, teach them. And that teaching might be, at least in the subjective experience of the child, oppressive. So the issue, again, is, are we a society that thinks of children as autonomous beings who have rights and have the right, in some ways, to even deny the religion of their parents.
And it's also going to be interesting to see how countries like Sweden deal with cultural and religious differences. Okay, after this, we're going to turn our attention north and take a closer look at the divisive Penang South Reclamation Project. So stay tuned to consider this.